My name is Evelyn Hart, 34 years old, and for the last 7 I've lived surrounded by cables, coffee cups, and quiet ambition. My garage in Cambridge smells like solder and determination. The neighbors think I run a repair shop, but what I've really been building is a new way to protect the world's most fragile thing data. When I began Lumalock, I wanted to create encryption that could think for itself, code that adapts, reshapes, and heals when attacked. Every night I'd watch my terminal scroll with living algorithms, each line a small rebellion against hackers, governments, and corporations that believed privacy was optional. After 5 years, I filed 34 patents, each more intricate than the last. They were my children born of caffeine, exhaustion, and stubborn faith. The offers started soon after. Men in pressed suits knocked on my door with figures that would have made most people weep. One from a data mining firm even arrived in a black SUV, promising equity, a 6-figure salary, and a strategic partnership. I offered him coffee instead and turned him down. I couldn't stomach watching my life's work become a weapon to exploit people's secrets. But conviction doesn't pay rent by the end of that winter. My savings account looked like a countdown. I ate ramen 3 nights a week and sold my car for parts. My friends from MIT called me brilliant but naive. "You can't protect ideals and eat them too," one of them said. Maybe they were right. Still, I couldn't let go of the belief that integrity had value beyond numbers on a check. One stormy Tuesday morning, as I debugged a faulty module, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar Boston number. The voice on the other end was calm, confident someone who had read my patents and wanted to meet. He said his name was James Anderson, founder of a company called Tech Vision. He didn't talk about profits. He talked about principles, and that was the first time I felt a flicker of hope. James Anderson arrived at my door on a gray morning when the rain hadn't stopped since dawn. Through the blur of the window, I saw a tall man in a soaked trench coat holding nothing but a briefcase and a quiet patience that didn't belong to the world of rushing executives. When I opened the door, he smiled like someone used to being underestimated. "Dr. Hart," he said, shaking the water from his sleeves. "I've been following your work on adaptive encryption for years. May I come in?" My garage looked like chaos to anyone else: wires, monitors, open notebooks. But James didn't flinch. He studied the code scrolling on my screen, the tangled prototypes on my bench. "You built all this alone, mostly," I said. "Just me and a stubborn belief that privacy still matters." He nodded, as if that single sentence answered everything. Over 2 cups of coffee. He didn't pitch me numbers or valuations. He asked about purpose, why I wrote code that fought back, what I feared corporations might do with it. No one had ever listened like that, not with curiosity instead of calculation. When he finally spoke, his tone was steady. "I'm not here to buy your patents. I'm here to give them a home. Join TechVision as our Director of Innovation. You'll lead your own team, keep full creative control, and develop Lumalock on your terms." It sounded impossible an offer without a catch. Then he handed me a draft contract, his signature already inked. I skimmed the pages until one clause caught my eye. Clause 7. In the event of any company breach of this agreement, all intellectual property shall revert to the original inventor. James met my gaze. Your mind is the company's foundation. It deserves armor. The rain softened against the windows as if the world itself paused. For the first time in years, I felt what safety might look like. I signed my name at the bottom of the page, unaware that the line I'd just read would one day decide everything. The first morning I walked into TechVision's headquarters, sunlight poured through glass walls that overlooked the Charles River. The space hummed with quiet purpose, no chaos, no ego, just people building something that mattered. James met me in the lobby, offering a genuine smile instead of a scripted welcome. "You'll find we move fast," he said. "But we never cut corners." My office was small but filled with light, the kind that made you believe the day ahead could be different within a week. I met my team engineers who treated ideas like living things. Among them was Theo Morales, barely 24, a shy but brilliant programmer with a habit of muttering solutions under his breath before anyone else saw the problem. I took him under my wing, remembering my own early awkwardness in labs where no one listened to women with ideas. Then there was Rachel Chen, the chief financial officer, elegant and calm, whose logic could slice through any argument without raising her voice. Numbers tell stories. She told me over lunch one afternoon, "You just have to know which ones matter." She became my compass in the strange, political ecosystem of corporate life. Every Friday morning, James and I met at a small cafe 2 blocks from the office. No assistants, no notes. Just conversation. He talked about responsibility, how innovation without ethics was just greed wearing a new name. I listened, soaking in every word. I had worked under brilliance before, but never under principle. Months blurred into years of steady triumph. Hospitals adopted our encryption for patient data. Banks replaced their old systems with ours for the first time. I saw technology serving people instead of exploiting them. Tech vision tripled in size, and my division became the company's beating heart. Late one evening, as the last elevator chimed closed, I looked across the glowing skyline of Boston and felt something I hadn't in years: peace. For once, ambition didn't feel lonely. In the reflection of that glass wall, I saw a woman who finally believed that purpose and profit could share the same breath. It was a gray Monday when the email came through, subject line, emergency announcement. I was halfway through reviewing a new encryption module when the notification blinked across my screen. My eyes caught the words plane crash and Rocky Mountains, and suddenly the office noise around me faded into static. By noon, the building was silent, no typing, no chatter, only the sound of rain against the windows. James Anderson, our founder, our compass, was gone. His private plane had gone down in a storm the night before. No survivors. For hours, people stood in clusters, stunned, holding paper cups they forgot to drink from. The memorial 2 days later felt unreal. I stood with Rachel among the rows of black umbrellas, watching the casket lower into the wet ground. Gregory Miller, our chief operations officer, was already speaking with board members before the service even ended. His handshake was firm, his expression controlled, almost hungry. By the end of the week, he was named CEO. His first email to the company arrived before sunrise. TechVision will honor James Anderson's legacy through renewed efficiency, market focus, and operational discipline. Our priority moving forward: revenue, scale, and shareholder value. The words read like a warning. When I walked past James's old office, the framed family photos were gone, replaced by minimalist art and a single glass award engraved with performance excellence. At first, the changes were subtle meetings that once began with discussions about ethics now opened with sales targets. Budget approvals stalled. My requests for research funding were under review. Gregory started inviting analysts into meetings that used to be just engineers. Rachel stopped me in the hallway one evening, her tone low and certain. "Be careful. Evelyn, Gregory never believed in what James built. To him, ethics are just marketing." That night, I stayed late, staring out over the Charles River. The city lights reflected in the water like fractured code, beautiful, but no longer clear. Somewhere deep down, I felt the sky itself had gone quiet, and something sacred was beginning to unravel. The first sign came on a Tuesday morning when I couldn't access my own code repository. My password, valid for years, suddenly returned an error. Access suspended pending security review. I called it. They promised it was temporary. A server migration glitch. But hours turned into days, and every attempt to log in reminded me that something deeper was shifting beneath the surface. My team had shrunk. Two engineers reassigned to optimize cross-department collaboration. Another moved to a project I'd never heard of, in meetings. Gregory spoke in polished sentences about streamlining innovation pipelines. But what he really meant was control. He wanted ownership not of progress, but of power. Late one night, while compiling quarterly reports, I stumbled on a folder labeled IPO Draft Confidential. I shouldn't have opened it, but curiosity has its own moral code. The document detailed TechVision's plan to go public with an initial valuation of $2.4 billion. My name appeared only once in a brief technical appendix. My 34 patents, every one of them registered under my authorship, were listed as exclusive corporate assets. For a long moment, I just stared. I had built this foundation from scratch, the architecture of my entire life, and now it was being sold, piece by piece, to investors who would never know my name. The next morning, I requested a meeting with Gregory. He kept me waiting 40 minutes before waving me in. "Congratulations," I said evenly. "TechVision's valuation looks impressive, but I'm curious why my patents are listed as company property." He didn't look up from his tablet. "Because you work here." "Evelyn, we own the work. That's not what the contract says." He smiled without warmth. "Contracts can be reinterpreted." I left before he could finish, my pulse pounding. That night, I searched my personal drive for the scanned copy of my employment agreement. When I found it, one paragraph burned brighter than the rest, its words glowing against the screen like a pulse in the dark Clause 7. In the event of any company breach, all intellectual property shall revert to the original inventor. For the first time, I understood why James had called it armor. Patricia Monroe's office overlooked the Boston skyline, all steel and glass and early evening light. She greeted me with the composure of someone who had seen 100 corporate betrayals dressed as misunderstandings. Her handshake was firm, her voice calm. I handed her the contract, printed and worn from years in my files. She read in silence, pen tapping softly against the table. When she reached Clause 7, she stopped. Her eyes flicked up, sharp and almost amused. "This is brilliant," she said. "Rare, too. Most companies would never sign something like this," James insisted. I told her. "He said my mind deserved armor." Patricia leaned back. He was right. And if TechVision breaches this agreement first, that clause is enforceable. Ironclad. But you can't trigger it. They have to cross the line. Her certainty steadied me, but only for a moment. Outside, the city pulsed with indifferent lights. Inside, I felt the slow weight of understanding this wouldn't be a sprint. It would be a siege. That night, I began preparing. I backed up my source code to encrypted drives stored off-site. I forwarded critical emails to a private archive, documented every meeting, every instruction. I even began recording conversations where state law allowed it. It didn't take long for people to notice the shift. Theo was the first to leave a new opportunity. He said, eyes down. My lab grew quieter by the week. Colleagues who used to stop by for advice now avoided me in the cafeteria. Even the engineers I'd trained started copying Gregory's clipped tone. Only Rachel stayed consistent. She still invited me for coffee, though now we spoke in coded language. Once, as we crossed the lobby, she murmured, "Keep your notes safe, Evelyn." Some of us still remember why we started. Her loyalty was a flicker of warmth in a place turning colder by the hour. I started therapy after waking one night drenched in sweat, heart racing from dreams of erased files. "You're not just defending your work," my therapist said. "You're defending who you are." She was right. In a world built on silence, I had to find a way to stay whole. The email came late on a Thursday night, mandatory board session attendance required. No context, no agenda. My stomach knotted before I even read the sender, Gregory Miller. When I entered the conference room the next morning, every board member was already seated, faces tight with something between pity and curiosity. Gregory stood at the head of the long glass table, tie perfectly aligned, smile sharp enough to draw blood. "Thank you for joining us. Evelyn," he began. Voice cool. "We're here to discuss a pattern of obstruction that's been jeopardizing our IPO timeline." I stayed standing. "Obstruction? I've done nothing except insist on transparency about intellectual property ownership." He ignored that, gesturing to a stack of papers on the table: emails, project notes, my own reports, twisted into evidence against me. Your refusal to cooperate has already cost this company millions. I have no choice but to recommend termination. I looked around the room at Rachel, who sat rigid and silent, at the others who wouldn't meet my eyes. You're trying to erase the very foundation this company was built on, I said. Gregory's smirk widened. He picked up a folder from the table, my employment contract, and held it up like a trophy. This, he said, almost playfully. This is what you think protects you before anyone could react. He tore it clean in half. The paper split with a sound that seemed to echo forever. Then he kept tearing, shredding the pages into white confetti that fluttered onto the table. You're nothing without this paper, he said. Security will escort you out. 2 guards appeared at the door. My hands trembled as I packed my things into a small box: the photo of my parents, a mug from James's first day, a flash drive I wasn't sure I'd ever use again. As the elevator doors closed, I caught Rachel's eyes through the glass, silent, burning. In the parking lot, my phone buzzed. Patricia's calm voice steadied me. He really tore it up in front of the board. Yes, I whispered. A pause. Then, almost smiling, she said, that was the dumbest thing he could have done. He just breached the contract in public. Patricia didn't waste a second. The morning after the boardroom disaster, I sat in her office surrounded by folders, legal pads, and the soft hum of a printer spitting out the contract we'd just unearthed. She had found the digital copy time-stamped, verified, and stored in TechVision's own HR archives. The document glowed on her screen like a quiet rebuke to everything Gregory thought he'd destroyed. There it is, she said, pointing to the final page. Signed by you, James Anderson, and 2 witnesses. It's authentic, and more importantly, it contains Clause 7 exactly as written. I stared at the line that had once felt like a formality in the event of any company breach. All intellectual property shall revert to the original inventor. Patricia leaned back, satisfaction flickering in her eyes. He didn't just make a mistake. Evelyn. He made it on record. In front of the entire board. That's not just arrogance, it's evidence. Rachel joined us that afternoon at a quiet cafe off Boylston Street. She slid her phone across the table. On the screen were forwarded emails from internal board threads, Gregory discussing strategies to nullify Clause 7 weeks before he tore up my contract. He knew exactly what he was breaking. Rachel said, he just didn't think you'd fight back. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. There was no joy in this, only the cold weight of what came next. Gregory had money, lawyers, and an army of people willing to twist truth into compliance. I had proof and a memory of the man who'd believed in me. That night, I drove to Arlington, to the small house where James's widow, Eleanor, still lived. She met me at the door with tired kindness and brewed tea the way James used to when I told her what had happened. She smiled faintly through her grief. James wrote that clause for this very day, she said softly. He knew someday someone would forget why this company existed, and he wanted you to have the power to remind them. I left her house under a cold, clear sky, knowing the battle ahead wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoring what was right. The courtroom smelled faintly of paper and tension. Rows of spectators filled the benches: investors, journalists, engineers who once worked under me. Across the aisle, TechVision's legal team sat in a polished row of suits, each armed with thick binders and a rehearsed smirk. Gregory occupied the front seat, his tie perfectly straight, his confidence untouched. When the proceedings began, their lead attorney wasted no time. Dr. Hart is a disgruntled former employee, he declared. Her allegations are exaggerated, her motives personal. His words echoed in the air like static, empty but loud. Patricia rose with quiet authority. Let's begin with the facts, she said. She projected the digital contract on the courtroom screen, the timestamp from TechVision's HR system shining clear as daylight. This is the original agreement. Clause 7 is neither fictional nor ambiguous. It exists, and it was destroyed in front of witnesses. She played the audio next to the board meeting recorded by a member of the compliance team who later came forward. Gregory's voice filled the room. "You're nothing without this paper." Then, the sound of tearing. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Gregory shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening as Patricia presented the internal emails Rachel had preserved messages proving he'd discussed nullifying the clause weeks in advance when she called him to the stand. He tried to maintain control, but under cross-examination, the veneer cracked. "Mr. Miller," Patricia said evenly, "did you know Clause 7 existed before you tore that contract?" His pause stretched too long. "Yes." He finally admitted, "I knew." The verdict came hours later, but it felt like years. The foreman stood, voice steady. "We find that TechVision breached the agreement. All 34 patents revert in full to Dr. Evelyn Hart." The sound in the room shifted reporters typing, murmurs rippling like a current. Gregory pushed through the crowd, ignoring the flashes of cameras, his face pale with disbelief. Outside, the cold Boston air felt sharper, cleaner. Rachel found me on the courthouse steps and pulled me into a brief, fierce hug. "He tore paper," I whispered, the words trembling but steady. "And I built proof. For the first time in months, I breathed without fear." Spring came late that year, slow and reluctant after a bruising winter. The day Aurora Systems officially opened its doors. Sunlight spilled through the same kind of glass walls that once framed my old office at TechVision. But this place felt different, warmer, freer, alive with purpose instead of pressure. Rachel stood beside me, sleeves rolled up, signing the first batch of partnership papers, while Theo configured our new network servers with the same restless energy he'd had as an intern. We started small a rented floor in a converted mill near the Charles River, but every desk, every wire, every screen carried the same idea James had once taught me: build what protects, not what exploits. Our technology wasn't designed to sell data or chase investors. It was built to give users control of their own privacy, to prove that innovation didn't have to come at the cost of integrity. Within months, the press called Aurora the quiet revolution. Clients who'd once hesitated to leave TechVision came knocking. Meanwhile, TechVision's stock spiraled downward when the board forced Gregory Miller to resign. His photo vanished from the company's website overnight. It was as if he'd never existed. I didn't gloat. I'd seen enough of what arrogance did to people. Instead, I sent a letter to TechVision offering a limited license for 12 of my patents. Under strict ethical conditions, no data monetization, no surveillance contracts. The royalties were directed to a foundation Rachel and I founded in James's name, supporting young women in STEM. One afternoon, as I unpacked the last of my boxes, I hung a framed print above my desk, the digital copy of my contract. Clause 7 highlighted in gold. For years, that clause had been just a safeguard. Now it was a reminder that words, when written with integrity, can outlast empires built on deceit. I stood by the window, watching the reflection of our new sign, Aurora Systems, glow against the fading light. "He thought he owned me," I said quietly, almost to myself, but I owned the line that ended him, and for the first time in years, I felt completely, peacefully free.